Join. Cool bananas. Awesome, sawsome, fantastic aroni. Cool boy. You've got 6 participants. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to take off your microphone because we're doing a bit of Q&A as well. So if you want to ask questions, you're more than welcome to. We're 1 minute ahead of schedule. So I think people are going to ask some questions and will be joining us shortly. So yeah, continue where we were from. As you can see, the camera works pretty fantastic. Loving it. It was some weird configuration on my laptop last time that I pressed a combination of keys and suddenly it works. And then last week, my computer just died. It wouldn't turn on for like a whole week. Don't know why. And then suddenly it started working on a Sunday. So weird. But anyway, we're back on track. So I apologize about that. Cool. We're talking about the big 5. We're going to be doing Q&A. We're going to be talking about questions. We're going to be going over some misconceptions. Last time we talked about the misunderstanding with elephants and elephant conservation, where we tend to have large, big parks with huge numbers of elephants. And that's not actually how it should work. We should have smaller populations of meta populations of elephants dispersed across the country. Also for an ecological reason, because reserves themselves benefit from elephants' presence. And, you know, a lot of reserves, especially in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, are feeling the knock of not having elephants. And there's actually a really interesting program. I've talked about it in elephants before, where they are doing a cloning exercise, for want of a better word, of the woolly mammoth. And it sounds like science fiction, but it's literally on the way. They say by 2035 they plan to have populations of woolly mammoths reintroduced into not Northern Europe, into Siberia. And I'm not making this up. You can go look up the Pleistocene Park and the mammoth reintroduction program. It's legitimate science. They're taking stem cells of woolly mammoths and they're impregnating Asian elephants, and they're planning within the next 15 years to reintroduce them. If this sounds like science fiction, remember in 1940 the heart transplant sounded like science fiction, and cell phones would have sounded ludicrous, and that's completely standard now. So quite exciting news. And yeah, that's hopefully, so maybe in our lifetime we'll be able to see another species of elephant return from extinction. And if anyone's got an issue with it, remember we drove them to extinction, so we have almost an ethical obligation to bring them back. Now, large heavy browsers like elephants in particular have an intrinsic role to ecology. And if anyone can't hear, please just send me a voice message. I'm assuming you can hear me because I haven't had any funny questions. And anyway, large elephants and mega browsers tend to have an intrinsic role with nature. A lot of plant species rely on them. Remember, we talked last time about how plants tend to become more woodland without their presence. And a lot of bird life, a lot of mammal life relies on more of a shrubby vegetation to survive. So when elephants go through the bush, smash up vegetation, they keep in a shrub-like form. And that facilitates the survival of a lot of animals. You know, sickle bush, for example, sickle bush thickets, you know, are encouraged by elephants, and a lot of farmers and old school conservationists hate sickle bush, and they do their utmost to remove it from reserves. You know, the Afrikaners call it a whole bunch of different terms. I've heard some horrible names for it. But it's a really important part of African ecology, and a lot of animals rely on sickle bush, and not when they goes into these big tree forms, but when they stay in this very thick, shrubby, thorny thickets that really make life miserable for animals to get in there. And the elephants, by browsing on them, help facilitate that. They keep them boxy and they keep them really, you know, in a shrub form rather than a tree form. And that allows breeding habitats for cisticolas, bushwhacks, allows genets and mongooses to have habitats. You know, a lot of animals rely on those thickets for protection from larger animals, and duikers will go and nest in there as well. When I say nest, I don't mean literally build a nest, but live in those habitats. And so, you know, elephants ecology, we should be in terms of having regular small populations across sub-Saharan Africa rather than these big mega parks which are isolated. Genetically, there's a problem with isolated populations, and also ecologically, the knock-on effects of elephants across the country will be far more beneficial than having really big parks with large populations of elephants. What we're starting to see is a form of artificial evolution in place because of human influences, that we are changing the evolution of elephants. Animals are evolved quite rapidly. You can see marked changes within 10, 15 generations. I mean, remember with humans, the average height of a human was 5'3", 180 years ago. Now the average height is 5'9" to 6 foot. And that's to do with a variety of social complications, but it is a form of forced evolution. Now, what's happened in Asia, and particularly happening in Africa, with the poaching epidemic that's going on in East Africa at the moment, and also the hunting problems that have occurred in sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly Southern Africa, is that elephant tusks are getting smaller. And that has a whole bunch of social implications for elephants. And remember, elephants have societies, they have really complex communities, and losing their tusks for elephants is as big a deal as any sort of social change for humans. I mean, it's a really major deal. African elephants, males and females, rely on their tusks. With Asian elephants, only the males rely on their tusks. But the tusks are a sign of dominance. It's a territorial display. It's a size of age and stature. It's also used in combat between males. It's used as a tool for digging and for pulling branches off. Okay, we've got someone raising a hand. Take your microphone on mute and you can ask a question. Whoever's asking, it just says Galaxy 4, so I don't know who that is. Type your message if you've got a message, and I'm just gonna put my glasses on because I can't see. So are there too many elephants? Yes, definitely, Anton. There are definitely too many elephants. The elephants in the Kruger National Park are at 300% capacity. That means if you took away 50% of the elephants, you'd still have too many. And of course, you get the other side of the equation where guys jump on straight away and say, oh, we must allow trophy hunting. And I have a categoric blanket anti-hunting policy in any capacity. It's, why would you want to kill a living creature for amusement? It's as simple as that. It's the same as going beating a dog to death for amusement. So I don't think we should ever condone trophy hunting, but we do need to find a way to lower the populations of elephants in the Kruger. And in most parks, elephant populations are saturated. Even Shishlu Amphalosi, they're at capacity. They're done, and they're not controlling them. Sorry, I got sidelined, Anton. We were talking about tusks, and tusks are decreasing in size because, particularly with the poaching epidemic in East Africa, is that the big tuskers are targeted. So the only ones that are doing the breeding are the ones with slightly smaller tusks. And every generation, the biggest tuskers are targeted. So the only ones breeding are effectively the runts. And with every progressive generation, you get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller tusks. We've got another question. Okay, there we go. Anton's just asking a question then. Same question applies. So the biggest, that has also happened down in Southern Africa with the trophy hunting industry, with all these hunters coming out and blasting away the big tuskers. And all that's left to breed are the runts. The same thing applies with lions. I've worked in reserves where they hunt out the big prime males and they leave the runts behind because no one wants to hunt them. So the only one breeding are the runts. So you get smaller and smaller and unhealthier lions. So the industry of trophy hunting, beyond being an ethical issue, is an ecological issue as well. You're taking away the prime breeders out of your population. I don't know who Galaxy J4 is called. I'm just going to call you Galaxy. Okay, so nothing actually causes the tusks to grow smaller. What causes?
I'm trying to ask you a question. Why are you not guys speaking up? What's going on? What did I?
So what's the question?
Yes, I was sorry about that. I was actually wanted to ask on the point of when you talk about the task.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm drinking wine.
Yes, I didn't understand. You said sometimes they grow smaller, sometimes they grow larger. Can you just enlighten a bit that?
Well, obviously, as I just said, the pressure, the genetic pressure, when only the small tuskers are allowed to breed. Historically, trophy hunters shot all the big tuskers in certain areas, so the only ones breeding were the small tuskers. So the descendants, the children and the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those elephants will be runts. And of course, with every generation, the biggest tusks get shot. So progressively, there's a genetic encouragement for those tusks to be smaller. Likewise, when elephants are boxed into reserves and they're not allowed to migrate, they might get certain nutrients out of it missing in their diet. For instance, historically, elephants would migrate. They would migrate from the Cape up to the Karoo. They would migrate from the Karoo to the Kruger National, down to KwaZulu-Natal. They would cover a couple thousand kilometers a year. Now we box them in a reserve that's 8,000 hectares, and we force them to eat food that is basically not growing in winter. So certain areas would flourish in winter, elephants would migrate there. And then in certain areas would flourish in summer, and elephants would migrate there. They don't have that option anymore. They're in a reserve. Screw you, eat what you get on the table. Tough if it's winter, we don't care. And that's not how they used to be for hundreds of thousands of years. And we came along 180 years ago and decided this was the way it's going to be. And that's why there's been these genetic issues, there's been these malnourishment issues, there's been stress levels with elephants. There's been so many knock-on effects because of, I don't like to blame the colonial card, but I will blame colonialism for the trophy hunting epidemic, and I will blame colonialism for differently boxing animals in. They love that. They love putting things in boxes, draw a line around it. A natural habitat is a square environment. Of course it is. So we need to rethink elephant ecology. We need, in my opinion, and I've spoken to a lot of ecologists and elephant conservationists, we need regular reserves of smaller populations rather than these big, massive reserves of huge populations of elephants. And that, of course, is going to be a challenge. I mean, how do you suddenly take away 300,000 hectares of land from people? That's a political issue. That's an economic issue. I can't answer that. But I'm saying ecologically, we need to start distributing our elephant populations. And one of the big benefits of elephants is that they start reintroducing plants, and they start facilitating the survival of plant species that rely on elephants, like the marula tree. The marula tree is struggling in areas that it hasn't been deliberately planted by people, and in areas that elephants don't exist. They are going extinct in those areas. That's just one of many species of plant that relies on elephant. The avocado, for example, which comes from South America, was almost solely reliant on the Colombian mastodon until about 9,000 years ago. I love this story because it's fascinating. And it was only because humans domesticated avocados that the avocado has managed to survive. But avocados in the wild are actually going extinct because what distributed avocados was the Colombian mastodon, which was an elephant. And they were hunted to extinction around 9,000 years ago by people. And unfortunately now the avocados are really struggling in the wild. The only way they survive is in captivity on farms in that area. But wild avocados relied on elephants. And marula trees, there's a lot of trees from Europe that also historically relied on mammoths that are going extinct, and some of them have been domesticated by people, so they've benefited and they've survived. Like marula trees have definitely survived in areas where people plant them intentionally, but they are not being planted intentionally everywhere. So when you bring elephants across the country, you start creating meta populations of trees as well. And those trees are host plants for insects, they're host plants for birds, they have a variety of knock-on ecological effects. So when you have these big giant pockets of elephants, you've got vast areas where you're not having those ecological benefits. One elephant every 100 kilometers would be far more benefit to the ecology of the country than 10,000 elephants in the Kruger National, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions before I start rattling on? I don't know. If anyone has, yes.
Can I ask for the last time?
Sure.
As you said, the elephants are the ones that migrate from other places to other places. Yeah. That means elephants or on what they, based on their diet, on what they eat. Actually touch on the part of marula tree. Yeah. I think we have a lot of marula trees in the Southern Africa, and it's actually one of the elephants' diet. So which means having all those marula trees, it's because of the elephants. They move from one place to another place. Yeah, so they disperse those seeds over large ranges, and that is not happening anymore. So those migrations where you had elephants moving from the Cape up to the Kruger and then down from the Kruger via what is now Van Rienings's Pass, it wasn't Van Rienings's Pass back in the day, they would have carried these plant populations and also the microbial populations. They would have encouraged migrations of other animals. There's a lot of effects of pushing down elderly trees, which would allow the survival of young trees. And what's happening in a lot of reserves across Southern Africa is you're starting to get woodland and forestation. And of course, that sounds great, but Africa historically, most of our ecology is not woodland and forestation focused. It is bush, it is scrubland, and our animals are adapted to that. Kudus are not adapted to eating, tall trees. Neither are Inyala or bushbuck or impala.
They don't do that. Duikers certainly not. And because elephants are no longer breaking down large tree canopies, you're starting to get these big, thick, wonderful tree canopies, which look great. But unfortunately, it doesn't facilitate a lot of the smaller browsers. And reserves of the carrying capacities are actually lower than areas with elephants. So if you go to a non-Big Five reserve, it'll have a lower carrying capacity than a Big Five reserve, because those elephants create opportunities for other browsers and other grazers. And which of course is, if everyone comes along with the economic issues of elephants and the challenges of elephants. I'm not talking about that. That's someone else's problem. I'm pointing at the problem of not having elephants. We need to figure out a way to facilitate elephant conservation on a larger scale. And this is not just my view. I'm not just saying we must have more elephants across the country. I'm saying that a lot of ecologists are saying that we need to have smaller reserves with smaller populations of elephants across the country. And of course, that will play hell for ecotourism, because what is the drawing card for Shishli Amphalosi is that everyone goes up there to see elephants. If you can go 10 minutes outside of Durban and see elephants, it'll knock onto Shishli Amphalosi or Kruger National or wherever, because those reserves will not be getting the tourists anymore. So that's an economic issue. I can't solve that. I can just tell you that ecologically, elephants should be more regularly dispersed across our country on intermittent reserves, that we can actually have a better, it'll benefit our ecology all around. I mean, I was working in 2019 in the Magaliesberg, and you can see like ancestral remnants of elephants. You can see old migration paths, which are basically these giant ruts cut down the hills by elephants coming down to the water source. You find very old marula trees, comfortably 200 years old, but you're not finding young ones. And eventually, in the next 100 years, those marula trees are going to disappear, along with the other tree species, and the area will be poorer for it. So we need to figure out a way. I'm not saying bring elephants across the entire country. We can't do that, unfortunately, as much as I'd love to. But we need to figure out smaller conservation goals at a more regular level, rather than these big, massive wildernesses, which are great, but they're only a small part of the equation. Anyway, yeah, that's that answer.
My last question is,
sure.
A lot of people find it like, as elephants causes a lot of deforestation, is the laying down of trees in the forest. So my question is, as you say, we must have the thing of conservation of like having elephants. Yes, I understand that. So, but a lot of people disagree on a point of, would say, like, we're having a lot of elephants in Southern Africa. So they're trying to find out a way of taking those, we call the process crawling or cropping, I think, culling, my bad. Yeah. So how can we manage that?
That's problem with can you tell me? Culling elephants, for me, I don't agree with. The same reason I don't agree with culling humans is not because it's wrong, it's because of the social impact on elephants. If you kill a mother in front of her child, it's going to have an effect on that child. Elephants process at a far higher level than an impala. You can go kill 5,000 impala, leave one behind. That animal's going to be no the worse for wear. It might be a bit shaken up, but you'll be an impala. If you kill an elephant in front of another elephant, you'll be traumatized. They're intelligent enough to understand the impact. So culling is not a solution, in the same way culling human populations is not a solution. You can't just say, well, China's overpopulated, let's go nuke China. You can't do that. They're going to, beyond the ethical reasons, there's a social implication of that. You can't just go kill women in front of their children, and you can't go kill husbands in front of their wives. I mean, elephants have this deep bonded family and maternal instinct, and this social atmosphere that a lot of other animals like rhinos and buffalo and all that don't have. You can go kill a buffalo's mother in front of her, and years later that buffalo will be fine, but it'll be a buffalo. It's not really going to make much of a difference. It might be a little more anti-people, but it's certainly not going to have anxiety, and it's not going to have trauma. But an elephant will. So we can't cull. The problem is now our reserves are saturated. They're done. They're full. No one wants more elephants because those reserves are at capacity. So what do we do? It's a challenge. Oh, there we go. Anton is saying that Mulder's Drift Lanceria is buying more land to bring in elephants. That's fantastic. And hopefully they don't bring in a small population, let them breed. Hopefully they bring in an entire population, relocate them. And that's really what you should do. Bring entire family units across. You don't just take dad across. You take dad and mom and all the kids, and preferably grandma as well, if you can. And So that's what we need to be focusing on, is redistribution, which of course is a massive cost, but we've created that cost. We, in all our infinite wisdom, 100 years ago, decided that migratory animals were not going to be migratory animals. They'd been migratory for millions of years. All of a sudden, we come along and say, hang on, I know better with my rifle, and I'm going to suddenly make a migratory animal a non-migratory animal. And now we have all these ecological concerns about the reserves being turning into deserts. And yeah, they will turn into deserts in the same way you'll turn anything into a desert if you cram too many animals into it. So we now need to say, we've created this problem, we need to fix this problem. And fixing the problem does not involve going out and shooting 500 elephants, because in the same way you can't just go out and shoot 500 humans. They don't handle it well, they don't adapt to it. And yeah, and all in all, unfortunately, we really need to just reevaluate the process of elephants. And on top of that, I mean, elephant ecology is a massive issue in Asia as well. A lot of Asian areas are really being hurt by elephants. We've got 3 species of elephant in the world. So there's the African elephant, the African forest elephant, which is limited to the Congo Basin and Central Africa. It's much smaller, only about 2.5, maybe 3 meters tall at the very most, whereas the African elephant is about 3.2 to 3.5 meters tall. The Asian elephant tops out at about 2.5, 2.8 as well. So we've got 3 species of elephant, and they all have very intrinsic ecological roles. The African forest elephant is very much adapted to living in a forest environment. He almost doesn't touch grasses, and he relies almost exclusively on large herbaceous trees and vines, creepers, that sort of thing. So they have a very different diet, and they facilitate the survival of forest plants because they're adapted to that. They're not pushing over trees. They're more adapted to eating vines and shrubby plants in the forests. Asian elephants have a very similar ecological role to African elephants, but interestingly, they tend to prefer grasses, where African elephants tend to prefer shrubs and bush. So you tend to have their ecological impact in those areas have knock-on effects. Now, of course, Asia has used to have historically a huge Asian elephant populations. They're now down to about 30,000 from about 500,000 in 1900. In 1900, we had 500,000 elephants in Asia. We're down to 30,000. Sri Lanka alone, when I worked in Sri Lanka, in the 1880s, they had around 25,000 elephants. They were estimated. They're down to under 3,000 now. So elephant populations are plummeting in Asia, and their ecology is also being hammered by it. We were all African, so we tend to focus on African elephant ecology, but elephant ecology is a world issue, because with the exception of Australia and Antarctica and Greenland, everywhere on Earth had an elephant species. There were mammoths in Northern Asia and in Europe. There were mastodons in North America, and there were Columbian mastodons in South America. And all those areas in the last couple of thousand years had this ecological loss. We can do a whole talk about mammoth ecology, but that's for another day. And I was watching these Russian scientists talk about mammoth ecology and the ecological justification to bring mammoths back. And they've shown all the facts. They said, never mind the ethics or whether it's right or wrong to clone. Ecologically, we need to bring mammoths back. The Siberian plains and steppes are suffering because of the lack of mammoths. And 9,000 years ecologically is a very short time. And we'll start noticing, Linda, sorry. We'll start noticing those changes in the future. By 2100, if we bring mammoths back, we'll start to see Siberia improving. Yeah, unfortunately, there's no real wild elephants. There's all these rumors that someone saw an elephant, but bear in mind, an elephant eats about 300 kilograms of food a day, which means that you're, in 10 days, it's 3 tons of vegetation. You're going to notice if that vegetation has been taken out of the forest. So no, there are no elephants in Nias now. So the forest elephants, Linda, are still in the Congo Basin, but those are African forest elephants. They're not the African bush elephant or the common African elephant, which is what the Nias elephant was as well. The Nias elephant was the African elephant, not the forest elephant. They have the forest elephants have pink tusks. When I say pink, I mean pinker than the common elephant. And they have straighter tusks because they're adapted to living in a forest. They don't dig. They tend to pull their branches down. Whereas the African elephant, or the African bush elephant, as otherwise known, tends to dig with his tusks. So he has slightly more curved tusks. Same as the Asian elephant, the males often dig in the ground, and you want curved tusks for digging. So yeah, if that answers that question. So they are the true African forest elephants. That's Loxodonta cyclotis, which occurs in the Congo Basin in Central Africa. And you have Oxodonta africana, which is the African elephant occurring throughout sub-Saharan Africa. What's interesting about elephants is that Syria, until about 3,000 years ago, so this is the time of Alexander the Great, 3,000 years ago, Syria had both species of elephant, African elephant and Asian elephants. They had overlapping territories. The African elephant is in Africa today, but it doesn't mean it only occurred in Africa. It actually distributed out into Israel. It actually distributed out into Syria, Jordan, those areas. It used to occur there. Likewise, the Asian elephant went all the way from India right through to Syria as well. And they've just been extirpated or driven regionally extinct by humans. But Syria, until 3,000 years ago, which is really recently, I mean, that's, around about that's about 1,500 years after the pyramids of Giza were built. There were both species of elephant living in that area. 3,000 years ago, the last of the woolly mammoths were still living in Siberia, actually. So that's, again, just the other day. That was after the pyramids of Egypt were built. So elephants have been driven to extinction really, really frequently, and we tend to revere them as these mystical creatures, but they were as common as dirt, not to denigrate them, but they were as common as dirt all over the planet until fairly recently in our history. And I think we have an ethical obligation and we have an ecological obligation to recognize the loss of those species. And we need to start working out ways either to simulate their impact or to bring them back. And if you have distributed populations across the country, that has a knock-on effect on the ecology around that. So you'll have elephants in a certain area, even outside that reserve, that the knock-on effect of that ecology carries forth. And in much the same way, if you have birds breeding on a reserve, they will affect the areas outside the reserve as well. So we need to recognize that we need to start bringing elephants back into areas. Tourism-wise, it's probably the worst decision because those big tourism hubs are going to take a knock. But ecologically, we really need to consider that it's a major concern. We've got apparently Zoom is being cheap. They knocked our time down to 30 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? It can be,
yes.
Yes.
How can you tell the difference between the three elephants you have actually mentioned, the African forest and the savanna?
Okay, well, the African elephant tends to have a sloped back with a large rounded lump for a head, and obviously his ears are large, shaped like Africa. The African forest elephant is smaller, firstly, and they don't occur in the same habitats. They're smaller, they tend to have a smaller head by comparison, even the males. They have thinner tusks that are straight and pinker compared, whereas the African elephant has a yellow tusk. It's quite a yellow tusk, whereas the African forest elephant has a comparably thinner, pinker tusk and straighter. The Asian elephant has a humped back. So the African elephants, both species, have sloped backs like a skating park, whereas the Asian elephant has a humped back like a hill and has two lumps on his head and very small ears shaped like India. And the females never have tusks, or almost never. There's once in a blue moon the females that have tusks. But the Asian elephants also tend to have smaller tusks, mostly because of humans. It's not genetically they would have smaller tusks. In the past, Asian elephants had huge tusks. It's the poaching epidemic and the hunting epidemics that have driven their tusks to be smaller over the last couple of 100 years. If you look back at photos of elephants from about 1,000 years ago in those old Indian paintings, those big tuskers had gigantic tusks, same as those African elephants. The hunting industry has driven those big tuskers into extinction, and only now small tuskers exist. So Asian elephants have humped backs, two lumps on the head, small ears. African elephants, both species, have a sloped back and one big head with African-shaped ears, like the ears are shaped like Africa. Quite easy to tell them apart. Asian elephants also, as they get older, they tend to go pink. They have a lot of capillaries that tend to rupture with old age, and they tend to turn pinker. African elephants don't have those capillaries in the skin. So when they turn older, they don't get ruptured and they don't break down. Similar to dolphins, actually. Freshwater dolphins, they go pink for the very same reason. The capillaries in the skin tend to rupture and they tend to becoming scarified and becoming pink all over the body. So when you see pink river dolphins, they're not actually naturally pink. They're usually older males that have been scarred from conflict and they've turned pink because the capillaries in their skin are damaged. Yeah, we've got less than 1 minute, guys, according to Zoom. They've cut our time down to 30 minutes, but hopefully that taught you something. You're more than welcome to ask me questions about literally anything and everything. I have Skype available. I have, sorry, not Skype. I have WhatsApp available on my Facebook. Next week, we're going to be doing buffaloes, not rhinos. And we're going to get into some detail about about buffaloes and their ecological role and their behavior as well. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to talk more in future about elephants as well. And yeah, I've uploaded videos of elephants on YouTube already about more of the biology of elephants. So you can go into YouTube and look up Nick Bredenkamp and you'll be able to find out that elephant lecture there on the biology of elephants. And yeah, thanks for joining, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Auf Wiedersehen. See you later. Okay, cool. Yeah, we can maybe talk about relocation elephants at a later date. Thanks, Linda, for asking questions.